You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Pete Giangreco, who's a partner at the Strategy Group. Pete has been involved in 7 presidential campaigns. In the last campaign, he was in the Democratic primary. He was lead general consultant for direct mail. Mm-hmm. He was deputy director in the presidential campaign that Obama won, and deputy director of paid media and
polling.
There we go. And Pete, let's get right into the show. Come back more with Pete Giangreco as we do the show. But you know, when we were back in the olden days, when Barack Obama was first running for the U.S. Senate, mm-hmm. I would say we pundits and so forth, and I'm sure you would say, that Barack Obama transcended race and he transcended politics. Mm-hmm. You remember that saying? Mm-hmm. Now, the point is, does Obama no longer transcend politics? Has he lost his coattails? Because he's lost 4 races in a row in terms of him putting his prestige on the line, and his job approval rating is down to 48, 46, real clear politics. Once you drop below that 50% line, wrong track, right track, the wrong country saying 58 to 35, the country is on the wrong track. Mm-hmm. And then, as you know, in Virginia, Obama lost. McDonnell won that the gubernatorial campaign. In New Jersey, Corzine lost to Chris Christie. Again, Obama came out big for Corzine. Massachusetts, Martha Coakley, mm-hmm. Obama was there. Mm-hmm. Republican Scott Brown won that. And now, in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania, Barack Obama had come out big time for Arlen Specter. Mm-hmm. In fact, part of that was presumably the idea of the switch when he made the switch to the from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. They would be there if there was any primary opposition to support him. Mm-hmm. 4 in a row.
Well, I think what you're saying is
4 Democrats that Barack Obama came out for couldn't win for those gubernatorial and Senate races. Republicans won those races. What does that tell us about the Barack Obama coattails?
What it tells you is that when you have the worst economic meltdown of our lifetimes, you're going to see that it's going to be tough for incumbents. You had an anti-incumbent sentiment that's really going across the country, and you've brought out where anti-incumbency has been a problem for Democrats, but it's been a problem for Republicans too. You had a sitting U.S. Senator, Bob Bennett, in Utah, who lost a Republican primary. You just had, just yesterday, Jane Norton, Lieutenant Governor in Colorado. The party-anointed candidate got beat by a Tea Party candidate in their party convention. So you're seeing Republicans and Democrats who are paying the price for the worst economic meltdown that you've seen in their lifetime. And that is going to continue to be the dynamic that runs through this electorate. The fact is, to use your numbers, you got 35% of people who feel the country is headed in the right direction. Yet, the president's job approval is 10 to 15 points higher than that. So it's very clearly, these are tough times. And I think what most people say is they're frustrated with Washington. Things are not getting done fast enough for them, but they believe the president's trying, and that's why he's outperforming that right direction number by a good 10, 15 points. The problem is he's got to deal with Congress, and Congress is broken. It doesn't work well, and it doesn't seem to matter whether Republicans are in control or Democrats are in control. Washington itself is broken, and I think they're frustrated that the president has not been able to break that impasse in Congress. And so from that point of view, it's a problem for him and for getting things done. But, you know, we're on the brink of passing financial reform now to rein in the abuses that took us into the gutter, to really crack down on the outrageous CEO pay that's going on, to put in a consumer protection agency. These are all good things that people are very strongly supportive of.
Well, we'll see. You know, putting interest rate restrictions on credit cards when many people in business use credit cards to finance their business. They're going to be,
you don't want to finance your business at 18, 20, 21, 27%. What the credit card companies did was really malicious, because we did have credit card reform that was pro-consumer, and they were, you know, without telling people, jacking your rates up to 27%. That's outrageous. That kills small businesses, kills Middle-class families and small businesses are going to be the engine of this recovery. They always are. And when you have predatory credit card practices like that, somebody's got to stand up to them. Now the Bush folks let them run wild, and under Obama now we've passed tough credit card reforms. We've shut down some of the wild west on derivatives that threw the credit markets into disarray. This is an administration that's cracked down and gotten things done. What the American people want to see is some results that they can see. When are we going to start edging down unemployment? When are the housing prices going to start coming up? And those are the residuals of the stuff that's already gotten done.
But Obama's pushing this legislation through because he got a Democratic majority, because he did elect a Democratic majority when he came in. So he's doing it all with Democrats. And he's doing that.
Well, he had to overcome a Republican filibuster, because now the way this obstructionist Republican Party operates is all of a sudden they've thrown the Constitution on its head and said everything has to pass with 60 votes, which is insane. It's one of the things that really frustrates people about Washington. Why isn't a simple majority any good anymore? But the Republicans, they want to stop everything. And there's a good reason for it. They are funded by the health insurance companies and the Wall Street CEOs that wrecked our economy.
Give me a break. The health care legislation passed because pharma was jumping on that and supporting that.
Okay? Not the health insurance industry. They fought it tooth and nail, and they fund Republicans. If you look at where all of Wall Street giving,
by big business.
If you look at Wall Street giving,
not by the doctors, but by the AMA.
Wall Street doesn't give to Democrats at all anymore. If you look at it in the last year,
substantial funds from
maybe in 08, but I'm saying now, and there's a reason for that, because he said, "Hey, the game's over with, guys. The days of you getting bailouts and being able to hand out outrageous bonuses to people who drove the economy into the ditch are over, and the Wild West derivatives trading is over. The market usually works, and when the market doesn't, that's where you have to step in and have some common sense regulation. That's what we got done. And guess what? This Wall Street reform is very, very popular with the American people. And it's going to be the kind of thing that Democrats are going to be able to run on all over the country.
They didn't address the major issue. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had let all those loans go out with mortgages that probably shouldn't have been started in the first place, because these folks couldn't afford those
that's your
loans.
version of the facts.
You don't think Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, what are their losses now? I think they're going to be bailed out to the tune of $150 billion. If those were good loans, why are they being bailed out?
Well, I mean,
and if there was a problem there, why didn't the reform package at all, why didn't they touch Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
Well, when you have a tough economy like we have, you're going to see defaults on mortgages. It happens. It's part of the economic cycle. The problem is that these low-performing loans all got bundled up and started getting traded like a floating crap game in the sky with credit default swaps and mortgage-backed securities. And where you had the problem was they were binding this up and selling it. You had some of the biggest financial firms, Goldman Sachs in particular, pushing these securities on one side, and on the other side, hedging against it, hoping, begging, crossing their fingers that it would fail so that they could make money on the other side. You saw all those emails from Goldman Sachs. That's why they're under now criminal investigation. This wasn't just Fannie and Freddie got a little too out there on mortgages.
You can't hang this thing on Goldman Sachs. There was a
multiplier for it. No, certainly Lehman Brothers did, and that was all credit default
Goldman Sachs
swaps.
was a market maker. They were dealing with sophisticated investors.
Right, but they are so big.
Whether something was a good bet or not.
This is the problem. They were so big that on one side they were pushing the sale of some things that later became toxic, and on the other end trying to make money on whether it failed, and that was the fundamental problem.
Can't spend the whole show on that, but you do have government involvement here in a number of problems. The rating agencies didn't do their job on rating those mortgage-backed securities.
That's probably true. I'll give you that.
There was a lot of risk there that didn't show up, and the rating agencies were given a monopoly essentially to be the raters by the government.
This is what
That's one thing I think they've changed in the legislation.
They did, and this is the problem when you have too cozy a relationship between Wall Street and the cops that are supposed to be watching them. And I think that's been a Republican or a Democratic a problem for 10, 15 years. Or too cozy a relationship
between Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the congressional committees that were supposed to be watching that.
Absolutely. Look,
and they're still doing that. Barney Frank was, responsible for that.
There's
Barney
more
Frank
that
is now the guy who's
I'll give you that.
Overseeing that. All right. So the Super Tuesday primaries. What do they tell us? that just passed. We're taping this show on May 23rd.
Right.
They tell us there's a lot of...
Which is Game 4 of the Hawks, by the way. I should say that's why I wore red today. Go Hawks. I shaved off my playoff beard to do this tonight, so if we lose, it's all your fault.
We appreciate that. Well, no, it's not our fault. All right, so what do you say? And you point out in Utah, you say that Bennett lost. That's right.
He lost the primary, yeah.
And he doesn't get into the primary election because two people who are more conservative, who the voters said they want somebody to stand up to Obama. Bennett, conservative as he was too moderate, was not stopping some of those things that people want stopped. The out-of-control spending,
well, he was
the
out-of-control
taxes.
Was the problem. That was the same problem with Arlen Specter.
Well, but it's more to that.
But
it's not just Washington.
You had Sestak, who's
it's the positions he's taken. That's the point.
Right, but the consistency between Utah and Pennsylvania is, in both cases, you had longtime incumbents who lost. One that was beaten by someone who was more progressive, one who was beaten by someone who was more conservative. So that's a wash. The commonalities, been in Washington too long, part of too many of the inside deals, too much of the deficit spending. Before Obama even got there, we had record deficits, took a surplus and made it into the worst budget deficit in history, doubled the national debt. People are upset about that, and that happened all before Obama was president. So
the tremendous growth in spending since Obama came in, whether he continued the bailouts of Bush and Pelosi and Reid.
Well, there are some things.
The stimulus was $800 billion.
And thank God for it, because it arrested the free fall the economy was in. And when you talk about things like the first-time homebuyer tax credit,
it didn't arrest anything. Because look at the job.
The first-time homebuyer tax credit has stabilized the housing industry, stabilized practice. You're starting to see
one-month housing purchases go up when you have a deal for the government giving an $8,000 tax credit.
Yeah.
The tax credit's removed, then
now
housing purchases go down.
Those are gone, but you're seeing prices going up in most markets. You've seen a stabilization there. So it worked. When you look at cash for clunkers, it worked. When you look at the tax, 98% of Americans got a tax cut.
10% unemployment.
The
stimulus was supposed to keep unemployment at 8%. So how can you say it worked when unemployment went to 10%?
Most people understand this. This is a Bush recession that Obama inherited and has done a lot to begin to stabilize and lay the foundation for growth. We got a lot of work he has to do on this economy, and we're not going to have a recovery until that unemployment number comes down. But you're starting to see consumer confidence come back. Look, middle-class families and small businesses are going to get us out of this recession, and you're starting to see consumer confidence rise. You're starting to see the tax breaks that small businesses are getting.
It's a rosy scenario, Pete. But
are starting to hire. You have more job growth in the last quarter than you had under Bush. So it's looking.
Well, let's see if this rosy scenario continues in terms of foreign policy.
Okay.
The Obama risks, the Obama danger points coming up in the next 2.5 years. Iraq. The combat troops will be pulled out this summer, right? We'll see how that works. It's now Obama's war.
And so far, so good.
So Afghanistan, those troops that were put in for the surge will come out in the summer of next year, right? Or at least start the withdrawal.
That is a goal. I mean, you have to wait to see what's going on the ground. So far, I think it's been very clear that Afghanistan has begun to stabilize, and we've seen some real victories.
Well, to the good. So Obama,
especially in southern Afghanistan,
continuing the Bush
for
policies.
8 years we didn't have a single victory in southern Afghanistan that was meaningful and lasting, and now we've really gone into the belly of the beast
not
here.
A single victory. I mean, Bush laid the groundwork by stabilizing Iraq. He laid the groundwork.
No, Bush ignored Afghanistan and fought in Iraq where we didn't need to fight.
Ignored too strong a word, but Iran.
Certainly was negligent.
What can you say is happening with Iran? Would you say Iran is laughing at the United States, laughing at the United Nations because of what we're doing or not doing in terms of sanctions?
Well, I think...
And they're laughing at Obama because he keeps saying he will engage them, and they keep turning away from him, and he says, well, it's never too late. So,
well, you always want to give them a way to save face and back out. But what the victory, I think, that the Obama administration's done by quiet diplomacy and staying at it, not throwing the long ball, was to get Russia and China now agreeing to sanctions, because sanctions just from the West would have been as weak as the sanctions were under Bush. This is the first time now we've got Russia and China who are now coming to the table and saying, okay, their longtime strategic and economic allies with Iran are now saying, hey,
Look at the cost of that. The cost of that is Russia got, as a part of the sanctions, permission to continue to sell to Iran surface-to-air missiles, which when installed would prevent Israel, the U.S., or anybody else from taking out the nuclear capability before it comes into existence.
I don't know, that's kind of a leap there, but I think what you're saying, what you've seen is that we've been able to isolate Iran.
You don't dispute that they, as a part of those sanctions, surface-to-air missiles can be sold by Russia to Iran that would knock out any attempts of Israel or U.S. to take out the burgeoning nuclear capability.
This is where I think you're
military
wrong.
Capability
this is where I
of
think
Iran.
you're wrong. I don't think that development precludes any option, and I think the president.
Those surface-to-air missiles, could be overcome by Iran, by the U.S. or Israel in an effort.
We've done it before, and we can do it again. The fact is, the president has kept all the options on the table, and I think the military have said all options are preserved right now. I don't think you're saying that just because there's missiles there that option is off the table, and I totally disagree with you. And I think the Joint Chiefs of Staff would totally disagree with you as well.
I don't think so. I mean, they're not there yet, but when they are there, I don't know. I don't think people are going to.
Well, that's why we
they don't make it easier.
To the folks who know more about it than I do.
All right, let's go over to you're working on the Senate campaign to make Alexei Giannoulias the next senator from the state of Illinois, right?
Yes.
Running against Congressman Mark Kirk.
Yes.
You know what happened to Broadway Bank.
Typical Washington insider, Mark Kirk.
Well, 10 years
who's on the wrong side of this dynamic. That he's
not a typical.
Yes, he is. He's a 10-year congressman. He spent the better part of the last 20 years.
10-year congressman coming out of a Democratic district, the 10th congressional district.
Right. But he spent almost 20 years in Washington. A guy who voted for every one of the Bush budgets that took a surplus and turned it into the biggest budget deficit in history, that doubled the national debt. Voted for every single one of them. Voted for tax breaks that ship jobs for companies that ship jobs overseas.
No.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. No. He's voted for
tax cuts.
He voted 6 times.
He's voted to control spending.
He's voted 6 times to protect taxpayer-financed CEO pay. 6 times he's voted to protect their CEO.
Before we get to Kirk, we'll get to the issues in a second. As you know, Alexei Giannoulias has this major problem with Broadway Bank. It failed. He was there. He ran on that. When he ran for state treasurer, he ran on his experience that he was the chief credit officer for Broadway Bank from 2002 to 2006.
2005, because he left in 2005 to go run for state treasurer, and he's been gone for 4 years.
Since then.
When he left the bank, as your notes should probably tell you, when he left the bank, it was well capitalized. It was in advance of its peer groups. It was one of the best functioning banks in the whole state, and frankly, one of the leaders in the country.
No, but the construction and development loans had gone under his oversight from 25% to 46% as a portion of the portfolio. That's way too speculative.
No,
the hot deposits. You know about the hot broker deposits? They'd increased by 400%.
They're called brokered deposits, and they're things that community banks use because, unlike the big banks, community banks tend not to draw as many sort of day-to-day banking account customers. That's why broker deposits are there, and every community bank uses them. Here's what's relevant. 9% of the non-performing loans were on the books when Giannoulias was there. It was after he left, it was the loans that went on the books. And frankly, most of those went down because this was a bank started by his father that believed in real estate, that believed in real estate was the safest investment. Like most people, it's most people's biggest asset. That's what this bank did. It loaned for commercial real estate. And if the commercial real estate market had gone down 15 or 20%, that bank could still be operating. When it goes down 30 and 40%, that's not tenable. That's why you had 7 other banks go down. On the same day, you've had a record number of community banks.
This bank went down because it had gone too much into speculative loans in Florida and other areas. It was making his loans outside.
Real estate. Then why did the other 7 banks go under that day?
A variety of reasons. They didn't go down for the same reasons that the
Yes, they did. They all went down because commercial real estate market
were they making loans to Michael Giangreco for land in Florida? You know, who he was convicted in 2004 of helping run a nationwide ring of brothels on bookmaking charges in 1998. So
I think if you looked at any community bank, you'd find 1 or 2 out of thousands of customers, 1 or 2 people who you look back and say maybe they shouldn't have done business with. But here's where the lie the Kirk campaign has been saying is that is the reason the bank went under. The bank went under because of the recession that we're in, a recession that was created, by the way, by all the votes that Mark Kirk cast
not all
with
banks,
George
not
Bush.
all banks went on.
Well, here's
the broker deposits.
There were 7 of them that went down on the same day.
The broker deposits that you said.
How can you say that? How can you say that those loans, those 2 people's loans, took down this bank when 7 other banks went down the same day?
I didn't say those 2 loans. I'm talking about 46% of his portfolio.
You're mouthing the same attacks of the Kirk campaign.
I'm not mouthing. I'm just saying explain
why they are illegitimate because it ignores the recession that we're in, and frankly, a recession that we got in because of the policies of President Bush. And Mark Kirk was the first mate on that Titanic.
This is not coming from the Kirk campaign. Comes from the
You're
Chicago.
Saying the same thing.
Comes from the Chicago Reader, which wrote about Alexei's albatross in December of '09. They said when Alexei left the bank, the ratio of brokered deposits to total assets of Broadway Bank was 68%. The average for all federally insured banks nationwide was 4.5%, a rather dramatic difference. The hot deposits were to bring in money
they're
to
called
make
broker
these
deposits. You are using the vernacular that this is somehow
68%. This is what they had to do. If you're going to bring in and pay high interest rates for those broker deposits, you got to get into speculative loans in the real estate area.
Okay. You're blowing it out of proportion. Let's talk about what's happened since the bank was sold. Since the bank was sold, there was a poll taken that had Kirk had six points in the aftermath of the bank. Since that time, the Giannoulias campaign went on TV with TV ads said the same thing I just said. This guy voted with Bush on every one of his budgets, created massive deficits, voted for tax breaks for companies that ship jobs overseas, and he said himself, after 6 straight months of job loss, that unemployment is, quote, not a big issue. This was just a couple of months before Lehman collapsed and the whole economy went out. This is an incumbent, a long-time, typical Washington incumbent who voted for all the bad stuff that got us into this mess, who's so out of touch that he doesn't know that unemployment is a big issue. And this is the dynamic. Those are his words, not mine.
He knows that you've got to control spending and you've got to control taxes.
This is the dynamic that beat Bennett. This is the dynamic that beat Specter. This is the dynamic that beat Holloman.
Pete, you got it all wrong.
All of these incumbents who voted for all this bad stuff in Washington.
Bennett was beat because he was too supportive of the Obama agenda. Kirk has not supported Obamacare
more than 90% of the time.
He has not supported on the key programs.
He voted against health care.
He didn't vote, and on the stimulus program.
And he voted against the stimulus.
He was not standing up standing up strong enough to resist the Obama programs.
That Obama stood for.
The two guys who will be in the primary in Utah were more conservative and thought to be more articulate in standing up to Obama.
The guy in Pennsylvania who beat Specter is more progressive and was more supportive of Obama than Specter, so your Obama frame doesn't fit. The frame that fits is that people are mad at Washington, and with good reason, and they are anti-incumbent. And that's what took down Bennett, that's what took down Specter, and that's what's going to be Mark Kirk's biggest problem. And the poll has shown it. From 6 points down, you ran those TV ads, Kirk came up with ads, a right-wing group was up with ads, equal spending, and now the race is tied. So it's very clear that when you give people the choice between the attacks that Kirk has made, which you've repeated here, and the facts,
the Chicago Reader has made, the New York Times has made,
and the facts.
These are not coming from the Kirk campaign.
That's fine. They're the same arguments.
Well, maybe Kirk's campaign is picking up what the New York Times says and the Chicago Reader says.
Can I finish though?
Yeah.
All those attacks happened. Okay. Kirk was ahead by 6 points. When they heard the other side of the argument, Bush. Unemployment's not a big issue, tax breaks for companies that ship jobs overseas, the race becomes even. And that, I think, is very telling. When you run against a typical Washington insider.
Some other polls have Kirk up by 5 or 6 points.
No.
Politics still puts it at real 5 or 6 points.
None of the polls that have been taken in the last 3 weeks, the only 2 that you've seen, Research 2000 has them within the margin of error, and Greenberg-Quinlan has them dead even. So the only 2 polls that have been taken since the bank was sold.
All right, we're going to go over to the Brady-Quinn campaign.
Okay.
You're not involved in that, right?
No.
But you are a Democrat.
Yes, I am.
All right. Quinn wants the race to be about social issues.
I guess.
You guess. Brady wants to discuss the Illinois economy, the Quinn taxes, the Quinn deficit, reform, and jobs.
The Quinn deficit? Come on, he's only been there a couple of
months. 2 years.
2 years?
Well, a year and a half.
When did Rod Blagojevich get thrown out?
January of last year, so a year and a half. Sorry, okay.
Okay.
Not a couple of months.
$13 million deficit
Not a couple of months,
was not created in a year and a half.
Yeah, but he's going to have to run on that. It's his leadership. It's his 2 years. Shouldn't he be talking about those issues? That was my point. Is he going to make this campaign about social issues, Quinn, or is he going to make it on jobs and the economy and taxes and spending?
It's unclear, because I think Governor Quinn has been tied up governing and trying to fix the mess. He's not getting a lot of help from Speaker Madigan or Senate President Cullerton, and so he's out there fighting with one arm tied behind his back. Meanwhile, you got a situation with Brady.
Does Madigan want Quinn to lose?
You'd have to ask.
Would that be, in your view, do you think that
Madigan
might be better for Lisa Madigan to run in 2014?
You'd have to ask Speaker Madigan that. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's the biggest development since the primary has been Brady's horrible campaign. The first thing he does right after the primary is submit a bill to allow these puppy farms to mass euthanize dogs and cats. Very, very unpopular, very, very stupid, I might add.
A mistake, and he's withdrawn from that.
The second thing, yeah, but he did it for a contributor in his districts. I mean, that's the kind of insider stuff that people don't like. The second thing they find out about this guy is that
what does Pat Quinn do for labor unions
he wouldn't show them their tax returns. His lieutenant governor wouldn't show his tax returns.
Pete.
Now all of a sudden he allows them, and what we find out is this is a guy who's worth a lot of money, who paid zero taxes.
You're down in the weeds.
So this
talk about the issues that people.
Well, Brady doesn't
about.
pay taxes.
Talk
I think
about
that's
spending.
Be an issue.
Talk about spending. Okay. I mean, the Quinn administration says they're making cuts. According to what I see,
they have made some pretty tough
the
cuts,
proposed budget. No, we're not talking $3-4 billion. Some say the budget's actually going up in spending relative to what it was before.
No, that's insane. Look, the big lie.
Talk about taxes.
The big lie. Whether it's a Democrat who says it or a Republican said it, the big lie is that you can cut your way out of this deficit. You can't. So there has to be a responsible way to cut first, to cut the fat, to frankly cut some of the muscle, unfortunately. But the thing that they're going to try to do is really, well, they want to protect education.
You got a Democratic majority, but you got a Democratic supermajority in the Senate. You almost have enough to override a veto, not that it would necessarily happen, in the House, and the Democrats can't get together to somehow cut spending and deal with this deficit.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a failure on the legislative side.
Okay, we're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Pete Giangreco, who is partner at the strategy group. He has worked in 7 presidential campaigns. He is working on the campaign, as you've heard, for Alexei Janulius, and his campaign to become the next U.S. Senator from the state of Illinois.
And I'm late to get to the Hawks game. So
all right, thanks so much.
Go Hawks.
Thanks so much for coming here, Peter. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Good sport. All right, so the big issue, though, is pensions. Pensions of state government employees.
Yes.
Republicans say, I think they're saying this, at least a majority I think are saying, you've got to deal with the pension issue. You've got to deal.
And there have been some Democrats,
no, but you got
Janulius for one, who said the same thing.
But it's not just that
pension system.
They changed it for new employees, but for current employees, you've got to change those pensions that are prospective pensions. That's where you're going to get substantial savings that are going to help.
You can get savings. Deficit. We have 3 different pension plans. It doesn't make a lot of sense. They should be unified as one. That's something that Lexi's talked about. In the
but you've got to cut those benefits for prospective.
Well, you got to
get
some
benefits of current employees. Do you agree with that?
You got to get some efficiency.
Do you agree with what I just said?
I think you got to do more than what Quinn has done so far, which I think was a big step.
Well, but he has to do more. Brady is saying this. Republicans are saying this. The populace is saying this. You want to talk about these peripheral issues? They want to talk about
you got to do
deal
fundamental pension reform, and that's something that Lexi's talked about, that Dan Hines has talked about.
Brady's talked about jobs.
It's time to get our
he's talked about jobs in the minority areas, in the African American areas, and Hispanic areas. Walmart wants to come in.
Does he even know where they are?
Walmart wants to come in.
Has he even been to Chicago?
He does.